What happens when royal privilege meets hard-hitting journalism? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with George Stephanopoulos and thinks he can control the narrative. Last night's explosive episode delivered the kind of television that viewers will be talking about for months. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The studio lights dimmed as Prince Harry strode onto the set with that familiar swagger that's become his trademark since stepping away from royal duties. Dressed in his usual casual attire, the Duke of Sussex settled into the guest chair across from George Stephanopoulos, flashing that practiced smile that's charmed audiences worldwide. But beneath the surface, tension was already brewing. Harry's media team had reportedly demanded editorial control over certain topics, something Stephanopoulos had quietly refused behind the scenes. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us tonight," Stephanopoulos began, his tone professional but carrying an edge that seasoned viewers would recognize. The veteran journalist had built his reputation on asking the tough questions that others wouldn't dare touch, and tonight would be no different. Harry leaned back in his chair, exuding confidence. "George, please, just Harry. We've moved past all that formality, haven't we?" His laugh seemed forced, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he was already preparing for battle. The opening minutes proceeded smoothly enough, with standard questions about Harry's latest charitable endeavors and his life in California. But Stephanopoulos was methodically laying groundwork, setting the stage for what was to come. His questions gradually became more pointed, more specific, probing deeper into inconsistencies that had emerged in Harry's various media appearances over recent months. "Let's talk about your memoir," Stephanopoulos said, his voice taking on that prosecutorial tone that had made him famous during his days in politics. "You've made some serious allegations against your family, particularly regarding how they handled your mother's death and your wife's mental health struggles. But some of the details you've shared publicly have been contradicted by documented evidence and witness accounts." Harry's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "George, I think you need to understand something. Everything I've shared has been my truth, my lived experience. I'm not going to sit here and have my memories questioned by someone who wasn't there." "But we're not talking about memories, Harry. We're talking about verifiable facts." Stephanopoulos reached for a folder beside his chair, the rustling of papers audible in the suddenly quiet studio. "For instance, you claimed in your book that your father cut off your security detail immediately after you stepped back from royal duties. But palace records show that security was maintained for several months, with significant taxpayer expense, while transition arrangements were being finalized." The prince's jaw tightened visibly. "Those records don't tell the full story, George. There's context you're missing. Conversations that happened behind closed doors that the palace would never document officially." "I'm sure there is context," Stephanopoulos replied smoothly. "But when you make public accusations that can be fact-checked, don't you think accuracy matters? Especially when those accusations damage the reputation of your own family?" Harry's famous composure began to crack. "Damage their reputation? George, let me tell you something about damage. The institution systematically destroyed my mother, drove her to her death, and then tried to do the same thing to my wife. That's damage. That's what we should be talking about." The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras. Stephanopoulos leaned forward slightly, sensing the shift in dynamic. "That's a serious accusation, Harry. You're saying the royal family, your family, deliberately drove Princess Diana to her death?" "I'm saying the machine, the system, the way they operate, it killed her," Harry shot back, his voice rising slightly. "And they learned nothing from it. Nothing. When Meghan started experiencing the same treatment, the same isolation, the same media manipulation, they did nothing to protect her." "But Harry, your grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth, publicly welcomed Meghan into the family. There are photographs, official statements, documented efforts to include her in royal engagements. How do you reconcile that with these claims of systematic persecution?" Harry's eyes flashed dangerously. "Photo opportunities, George. All of it was for show. You have no idea what was happening behind the scenes. The conversations, the The deliberate exclusions, the way information was withheld from us while being freely shared with other family members. Stephanopoulos sensed he was approaching dangerous territory, but he pressed forward with the relentless precision that had defined his career. Let's be specific then. In your various interviews, you've mentioned conversations with your father about racism within the institution. But when pressed for details, you've been vague about exactly what was said and when. Don't you think if you're going to make such serious allegations, the public deserves concrete details? The prince's composure was rapidly deteriorating. The public deserves the truth, George, not the sanitized version the palace wants them to hear. But I'm starting to wonder whose side you're really on here. I'm not on anyone's side, Harry. I'm doing my job as a journalist, which is to ask hard questions and seek truth based on verifiable facts, not just feelings or interpretations. Harry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the studio floor. Verifiable facts? You want verifiable facts, George? Here's a fact. I lived through it. I watched my mother suffer. I watched my wife suffer. And I watched my family do nothing to help either of them. Those are facts you can't verify in your precious palace documents. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Crew members exchanging glances as they realized this interview was spiraling into something unprecedented. Stephanopoulos remained seated, his expression calm but alert, recognizing that he was witnessing something historic unfold. Harry, please sit down. Let's discuss this rationally, Stephanopoulos said, gesturing toward the chair. But the prince was beyond rational discussion now, his royal training warring with his obvious anger. Rationally? There's nothing rational about watching your family throw you under the bus for the sake of protecting an institution that's fundamentally broken. The cameras continued rolling as Harry began pacing slightly, his media training clearly forgotten in his growing agitation. What had started as a standard celebrity interview was transforming into something far more volatile, and everyone in the studio could sense that they were approaching a point of no return. Stephanopoulos watched Harry's agitated movements with the calculating gaze of a seasoned interrogator. He knew he had struck a nerve, and like any skilled journalist, he wasn't about to let the moment pass. Harry, your reaction right now is quite telling. If your allegations are as solid as you claim, why are you getting defensive when asked for specifics? Harry whipped around to face him, his eyes blazing. Defensive? You think I'm being defensive? George, I've spent years being told to stay quiet, to protect the institution, to never speak out, even when lies were being told about my wife in the press. I'm not defensive. I'm done with the gaslighting. But that's exactly my point, Stephanopoulos pressed, his voice remaining maddeningly calm. You say lies were told, but when we examine the actual reporting from that time period, many of the stories were based on palace sources. Are you suggesting your own family was deliberately feeding negative information to the media about Meghan? The accusation hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Harry's face flushed red, a vein becoming visible at his temple. You really want to go there, George? You want to talk about palace sources? Let me tell you about palace sources. They're not anonymous tips from random courtiers. They're coordinated campaigns, approved at the highest levels. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof of this coordination? Stephanopoulos leaned forward, sensing he was on the verge of either a major revelation or a complete meltdown. Harry laughed bitterly, running his hands through his hair. Proof? You want me to produce smoking gun emails? George, you're smarter than that. The palace doesn't leave paper trails for this kind of thing. But I lived it. I watched meetings happen, saw the strategic timing of releases, witnessed the way negative stories about us would mysteriously appear right when other family members needed positive coverage. So, you're asking the American public to take your word for it, based on your interpretation of events, without any corroborating evidence? I'm asking people to use their common sense, Harry exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. Look at the pattern, George. Every time there was a scandal involving other family members, suddenly there would be a negative story about us. When my uncle's legal troubles were heating up, what happened? Stories about Meghan being difficult with staff. When there were questions about my father's charity dealings, what appeared in the press? Claims about our security costs. Stephanopoulos pulled out another document from his folder, his movements deliberate and theatrical. Since you mentioned patterns, let's look at another one. In your Netflix documentary, your book, your various interviews, you've painted yourself as the victim in virtually every scenario. The wedding planning, you were the victim. The departure from royal duties, you were the victim. The ongoing family tensions, you're the victim. Don't you see a pattern there? Harry stopped pacing abruptly, his face contorting with rage. Are you seriously psychoanalyzing me right now? Are you suggesting that everything I've been through, everything my wife has been through, is somehow our fault? I'm suggesting that there are always multiple perspectives to any story, and yours seems to consistently cast you in the role of the wronged party, while everyone else, your father, your brother, your stepmother, the palace staff, they're all the villains. Because that's what happened, Harry shouted, all pretense of royal dignity abandoned. You want another perspective, George? Here's a perspective. I watched my brother's office brief against us to make him look good. I have evidence of that. I watched my father choose his new wife and his reputation over his own son's well-being. I watched... Evidence? Stephanopoulos interrupted sharply. You keep mentioning evidence but never producing it. If you have proof that your brother's office was briefing against you, why haven't you shared it? Why the vague allegations without substantiation? Harry's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Because some things are more important than winning a public relations war, George. Because some of us still believe in family loyalty, even when it's not reciprocated. Family loyalty? Stephanopoulos' eyebrows shot up incredulously. Harry, you've written a best-selling book detailing private family conversations, participated in a 6-hour documentary exposing family dynamics, and given multiple interviews sharing intimate details about your relationships with your father and brother. How exactly is that family loyalty? The studio had gone completely silent, except for the low hum of equipment. Even the camera operator seemed frozen, afraid to move and break the spell of this unprecedented confrontation. Harry stood in the middle of the set, his chest rising and falling rapidly, looking like a man who had been cornered. You don't understand, he said finally, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Everything I've done, every interview, every revelation, it's been to protect my wife and children from the same machine that destroyed my mother. If that means breaking some unwritten code of silence, then so be it. Stephanopoulos seized on the opening. But has it protected them, Harry? Or has it actually made things worse? Your children are now growing up with their grandfather's reputation, under constant attack from their own father. Your wife is more scrutinized and criticized than ever. Your family relationships are seemingly irreparable. What exactly have you protected them from? Harry's composure completely shattered. How dare you, he roared, taking a step towards Stephanopoulos' desk. How dare you sit there and question my motivation for protecting my family? You have no idea what we've been through, what threats we've faced, what it's like to have the entire British establishment turn against you. I'm not questioning your motivation, Stephanopoulos replied steadily, seemingly unfazed by Harry's proximity. I'm questioning your methods and your version of events. There's a difference. The prince's face was now completely flushed, sweat beading on his forehead under the hot studio lights. My version of events? George, let me tell you something about my version of events. My version includes watching my pregnant wife contemplate suicide because of the pressure and isolation. My version includes being told by my own family that her mental health struggles were inconvenient timing for the institution. My version includes... And yet, Stephanopoulos interrupted coldly. When your wife spoke about these mental health struggles, she admitted she never actually sought help from the many resources available to her. She never called a therapist, never reached out to the numerous mental health charities the royal family supports. Instead, she waited until a globally televised interview to reveal these struggles. Doesn't that strike you as odd timing? The question hit Harry like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could speak. Are you actually questioning whether my wife was suicidal? Are you suggesting she made that up for sympathy? I'm suggesting that the timing and manner of these revelations raise legitimate questions about their purpose and authenticity. Stephanopoulos replied with brutal precision. Harry's face went from red to white in an instant. The transformation was so dramatic that several crew members instinctively took a step back. When he spoke again, his voice was barely controlled, shaking with barely contained fury. George, I think we need to be very clear about what's happening here. You're not just questioning my story anymore. You're questioning my wife's mental health crisis. You're suggesting she lied about wanting to end her life. That crosses a line that you can't uncross. The studio atmosphere had become electric with tension. Everyone present could sense that this confrontation was about to reach a crescendo that would change everything. Stephanopoulos, however, showed no signs of backing down, his journalist instincts overriding any concern for diplomatic niceties as he prepared to deliver what would prove to be the final blow. Harry, I understand you're upset, but let's talk about facts. Stephanopoulos continued relentlessly. Your wife claims she was denied help by the institution, but the royal household employs numerous mental health professionals. There are protocols in place, resources available. Yet she chose to suffer in silence until it became a talking point in a primetime interview with Oprah Winfrey. As a journalist, I have to ask, doesn't that seem strategically convenient? Harry's entire body went rigid. For a moment, the studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm, which somehow seemed more terrifying than his previous shouting. George, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. My wife was in such a dark place that she told me she didn't want to be alive anymore. She said that to me while she was carrying our child. And you're sitting here on television suggesting she manufactured that pain for strategic purposes? Stephanopoulos didn't flinch. I'm suggesting that the timing and public revelation of private struggles raises questions that any reasonable person might ask. If someone is truly in crisis, they seek help. They don't save it for a globally televised interview months later. You absolute, Harry caught himself, visibly struggling to maintain some semblance of control. You have no idea what you're talking about. None. You think it's easy to ask for help when the very people you're supposed to trust are the ones causing your pain? When the institution that's supposed to protect you is the one feeding stories to the press about you? But that's just it, Harry. Stephanopoulos pressed forward mercilessly. You keep saying the institution, as if it's some faceless entity. But we're talking about your family. Your grandmother, who by all accounts adored you. Your father, who walked Meghan down the aisle when her own father couldn't be there. Your brother, who was your best man. Are you really expecting people to believe they were all part of some conspiracy against you? Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness and rage. My grandmother was a figurehead, George. She didn't run the day-to-day operations. And my father? My father chose his image over his son's well-being. And my brother? Harry's voice cracked slightly. My brother sold me out to save himself. That's the truth you seem so desperate to uncover. Strong words, Harry. But here's what I don't understand. If your family is as toxic and destructive as you claim, why do you keep trying to maintain some relationship with them? Why not cut ties completely? Why the ongoing drama and public battles, if they're truly beyond redemption? The question seemed to hit Harry like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, his hand reaching out to grip the back of his chair. Because they're still my family. Because despite everything, I still hoped. I thought maybe if I told the truth publicly, they'd finally listen, finally understand what they'd done. So this has all been an attempt to force reconciliation through public humiliation? Stephanopoulos' tone was clinical, dissecting. You've aired your family's private business on global television in hopes they'd apologize and welcome you back? Harry's face contorted with anguish and fury. No, it wasn't about getting back in their good graces. It was about protecting my wife and children from the same machine that killed my mother. But your mother died in a car accident, Harry. She was being chased by paparazzi, yes, but she died because her driver was intoxicated and driving recklessly. How exactly did the machine kill her? The question hung in the air like a detonated bomb. Harry stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. The crew members looked horrified, realizing they were witnessing something that would be dissected and analyzed for years to come. How dare you?" Harry whispered, his voice barely audible. Then louder, "How dare you minimize my mother's death like that? Those paparazzi were there because the palace never protected her. They threw her to the wolves just like they did to us." "But Harry, your mother had been separated from your father for over a year when she died. She was no longer under palace protection by her own choice. She was living independently, making her own decisions about her security arrangements. How is that the palace's fault?" Harry's composure completely disintegrated. "Stop! Just stop!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "You don't get to rewrite history! You don't get to sit here and act like my mother's death was just some accident. The system failed her. The press hounded her. And my father's people leaked stories about her right up until the end." Stephanopoulos remained infuriatingly calm. "I'm not rewriting history, Harry. I'm stating documented facts. Your mother made choices about her life after her divorce. Some of those choices put her in vulnerable positions. That's not the same as being murdered by an institution." "Get me out of here," Harry said suddenly, his voice hollow. He looked around the studio wildly, as if seeing it for the first time. "I said, get me out of here. Where's my security detail?" A man in a dark suit appeared at the edge of the set, clearly Harry's protection officer. Harry began walking toward him, then stopped and turned back to face Stephanopoulos one final time. "You know what, George? I came here tonight thinking I could have an honest conversation with someone I respected. I thought maybe, finally, someone would ask the right questions and actually listen to the answers. But you're just like all the rest of them. You're more interested in protecting the establishment than in hearing the truth." "I'm interested in the truth, Harry. That's why I ask hard questions. That's what journalists do." Harry shook his head violently. "No, that's what prosecutors do. That's what people do when they've already decided someone is guilty and they're just trying to trap them into admitting it." He began removing his microphone with shaking hands. "You want a story for your show? Here's your story. I came here in good faith and got ambushed by someone who's clearly been fed talking points by the same people who've been trying to destroy my family for years." "Harry, no one fed me anything. These questions come from inconsistencies in your own public statements." But Harry was already walking away, his security detail flanking him. As he reached the edge of the set, he turned back one final time, his face a mask of hurt and rage. "You can tell whoever sent you to do this that it worked. You got your confrontation, you got your headlines. But you lost something too, George. You lost your integrity. And that's something you can never get back." With that, Prince Harry strode off the set, leaving behind a stunned studio and a veteran journalist who suddenly looked less certain of his victory than he had moments before. The cameras kept rolling as Stephanopoulos sat alone at his desk, the weight of what had just transpired beginning to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. The interview that was supposed to last an hour had ended in less than 30 minutes, but those 30 minutes had delivered the kind of explosive television that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew began the process of shutting down equipment, everyone present knew they had witnessed something unprecedented, a complete breakdown of the careful choreography that usually governs celebrity interviews, replaced by raw, unfiltered confrontation that had left no one unscathed. The aftermath would be swift and brutal, with both men facing intense scrutiny for their roles in the debacle. But in that moment, as Harry's footsteps echoed through the hallway and disappeared into the night, the only sound left in the studio was the quiet hum of cameras finally powering down after capturing one of the most explosive interviews in television history.